Richard Boom here. I'm not part of this madness.
Must have been to a higher ground. Lifted up.
Hello guys, welcome to I'm Not Part of This Madness, a show where I record my thoughts about society's madness. And as I mentioned before in our first episode, this first 2 or 3 episodes will be primarily about the show, or at least to explain or to give context what this entire show is all about. And in this episode, we will talk about what you can expect in this show and why this show exists. So, not to be anticlimactic, but I want to get up front what this show is all about. I made this show for the primary reason that I want to spread or encourage the discipline of critical thinking, i.e. using our brains. If I could just encourage enough people to actually use their brains when it comes to approaching ideas, I would die happy. I am doing that because ideas is what drives humanity. And ideas could make or break our species. And this is why it is important for us to have some discipline by which to evaluate the merit of any idea or any belief that we encounter. Unfortunately, not a lot of people can think, or at least they think that they can think, but for the most part, a lot of people just follow the crowd and kind of parrot whatever they hear. But if you dig deeper, they could not reason. All you will hear are emotions talking, and the reasoning is kind of absent. A lot of people will just believe what is comfortable or what feels good in that moment, and there's not a discipline of critical thinking. It's very sad that a lot of these people who cannot think for themselves are like inert idiots that needs to be acted upon and fed their own thoughts, and they blindly accept whatever society feeds them or whatever the media feeds them. They follow the herd. This is very, very dangerous, especially in our era of fake news and leftist propaganda. I personally want to avoid these faulty ideas because they are just so dangerous. It really has catastrophic effects as far as humanity and the species go. And if you don't believe me, we just need to go back to history to see how dangerous beliefs and ideas are. And, I will walk you to a few of them, but keep in mind that in every era, there are beliefs that go unquestioned and people kind of just believe it without evidence or without proof or without going deeper into the structure or the essence of what they believe in. In 1478, this is the height of the power of the Catholic Church, and obviously the mainstream belief is the teachings of the Church. And nobody really questioned it. This is the reality of the time. And unfortunately, the very few who questioned it were persecuted by the believers. Catholic Church thought police. And this is what I'm saying, why it is so dangerous. Because in 1478, you have the Spanish Inquisition, or what I call the Catholic Church thought police, which we could rightfully equate or compare to the PC police and the social justice warriors and the mainstream media. So if you are on the right or you are a Republican, I'm sure you can imagine the horrors of that time. But if you're a leftist or one of these social justice warriors, well, first off, you won't be listening to me and you won't be here because you will just be out there shouting racist and xenophobia and whatever. And it doesn't stop there. Throughout history, we have ideas that actually killed people and was very destructive to humanity. And the horrors of the belief in the Catholic Church, or the beliefs of the church, and atrocities of religion does not stop there. In 1692, in Massachusetts, we had the Salem witch hunts, where 200 people were accused of witchcraft. And in 1 year, 27 of those people who were accused died as a result of the Salem witch trials. Most of them, of course, they died through execution, like in our previous example. Others, they died in prison. I mean, the prison of those time is absolutely horrendous. It's nothing like the prisons that we have today. So a lot of people also died in the prison. And surprisingly, only one person died in torture. Of course, people during those time were superstitious and religious. But the thing is, I mean, maybe we could excuse them for not having the framework on which to judge ideas. The unquestioned belief there is that witches caused all of the problems in the town of Salem. And again, I would repeat this. It's sad that these people did not have the frame of mind or the thinking or the mental resources that we have today. And this is the reason why I am making this sacrifice of my time, my energy, and not to mention my money to make this show and to spread the discipline of critical thinking, or of thinking based on facts and evidence. And if you think that the Salem witch hunts were bad enough, well, my friend, I'm sorry to say, but think again. Because during the 1300s through the end of the 1600s, in Europe, 40,000 to 50,000 people, and of course, mostly women, those poor women, were executed for witchcraft by hanging, drowning, or burning. So I'm looking through all of this, and these people believe in the existence of witches, spirits, and the devil compelling people to do bad things. If there was a person or a podcast that said, hey, wait, whoa, let's just back off and let's see if there are no natural causes to our current experience. And maybe, guys, we should let these poor women argue their case and prove their innocence with reason and evidence, instead of us torturing them until they basically say whatever we want them to say. Now, of course, there are people out there who will tell me, oh, this is not about belief. This is the Catholic Church, the evil Catholic Church. This is sexism and misogynism. This is crime against women and blah, blah, blah. But that is beside the point. The point is, if we had a society back in the 1300s that uses reason and evidence, none of these 40,000 to 50,000 lives would have been lost unnecessarily. If the vast majority of the people could think and not just be swept up by this mass hysteria, if they could have just said, wait, before we kill all these women, we should first look for natural causes. Why we are experiencing before blaming it to the witches and the spirits and the devil and sacrificing these 40,000 to 50,000 women on the altar of irrationality and fear of witches and devil. Of course, people's irrationality and these crazy beliefs that people just accept instead of analyzing it and thinking about it does not stop. In 1940s, and a lot of you know this, there's another insanity that swiped through humanity. In the 1940s, 5 to 6 million Jews in Europe were killed by the Nazis. This is out of the estimated 9 million living in Europe at the time. So 5 to 6 million, that is more than 50% of the entire population of Jews living in Europe. And this is all because the Nazis believed that the Aryan race is superior, and they completely dehumanized the Jews, and they felt right to exterminate the Jews because they are inferior. And again, if we had a big enough society that thinks and analyzes thoughts and beliefs, and if this is the norm, if critical thinking is the norm and not just emotional based la la land of, I don't know, mashed together, pretend to be rational thinking, this wouldn't have happened. You see how dangerous it is? Especially ideas that are not vetted by reason and evidence. You see how dangerous it is when we let emotions sweep us and when we are not grounded in reality. So the question is, why and how these things happen, and what causes rational people to do this? What I would say is a lot of people don't really think. And the sad part is they think they can think, even when they are just reacting emotionally to ideas and, coming to conclusions. And they just prop up this knee-jerk emotional conclusion with some half-assed evidence and call it thinking. The sad part is ideas do spread, especially when ideas and beliefs are based on emotion. And it's very hard, fear, greed, and all of these emotions are just so infectious. It's like wildfire. Once you let it out of the can, it just spreads, especially among people who does not have the discipline or mental energy to think and to look for evidence and, to debate rationally with other people. And it doesn't help that we have the mainstream media and thought leaders, quote unquote thought leaders, who have a strong bias and presents their ideas without evidence and are not willing to accept other ideas or accept evidence that they are wrong. I mean, this is like the Spanish Inquisition all over again, and we don't even see it. I mean, you see it in the media, you see it in the social justice warrior movement. These are people who just cannot accept evidence. And these people, they're like so allergic to the truth. I don't know this la la land of leftist ideas of what's going on in their head, or what kind of logic they have, or what kind of reason they have, if they have any. So it's bad enough that these ideas spread, and it's bad enough that we have authority figures or experts to spread it. You also have, of course, when you have people, the ideas gets repeated over and over and over and over again, and the media will repeat it over and over and over again, and you will see it everywhere. And through repetition and through repeated exposure to these ideas, it normalizes these ideas. And when something gets normalized, more and more people accept it. And when more and more people accept it, the more it will get normalized. And when that happens, you will have Salem witch hunts. You will have the Aryan race all over again. What causes these things to happen are people who do not think. Think about it. But I guess the question is that how do you recognize madness? How do you know when you're going down the path of madness? How do you know that you are facing madness when you see it? How do we know that we are facing a dangerous idea or a person or a group of people that have a dangerous idea that could lead to the next Salem witch hunt? You can easily recognize a person that is mad when that person has confirmation bias. These are people who come to the conclusion and look for evidence to support that conclusion. So normally we say let the evidence speak for itself. These people don't follow that. They don't study the facts before coming to a logical conclusion based on those facts. They just believe whatever they want to believe, even to the evidence of the contrary. And therein lies the path to madness. Can you imagine just believing whatever you want to believe, even if the reality says otherwise? Another sign that you are going or you are facing the path of madness is the presence of a big ego. Once you see a big ego, my advice is to just stay away, because the presence of the ego is like a road sign that says, here lies the path of madness. The thing with the ego is that the ego is based on a belief and the validity of that belief. The ego depends upon the continued validity of the belief so it can exist. And you can imagine this ego as some sort of an entity that is controlling the person that you are talking to or arguing with. And the problem with that is, if the belief of that person or the idea of that person gets invalidated or falsified, then their ego ceases to exist, or the ego dies. And the thing with that is, the ego, like all entities, fight for survival. So you can think of it as something, the entity possesses that person. And almost always, this is why I say you should just stay away when you see the presence of the ego, because the ego will protect itself at all costs, and there is no evidence that can convince a huge ego to the contrary. And this is why people with huge egos are almost always defensive or are emotional. The ego fears being false, because being false is an equivalent of death. And this, I would use this as a prologue for emotional thinking. Whenever you see people that are arguing emotionally, or the basis of their arguments are subjective feelings, do not step there, because that is where madness lies. And there's no amount of rational argument that could argue against emotions. If things are subjective, then you do not have a standard to apply, or you do not have a standard to evaluate the validity or the truthness of certain ideas. And going together with that emotional thinking, or people that are emotional, are personal attacks. When you see a person that are directing insults and slander towards a person that have a different opinion, almost always the idea of that person is toxic. Because rational people do not slander, they provide evidence and reason. And rational people accept when they are wrong, especially in the face of overwhelming evidence. People who think have the capability to change their opinion based on evidence. And this is something that irrational people don't get. They will never understand this. And this is why it is important for you to recognize where madness lies, because there's no amount of reason that will penetrate that thick la-la land of irrational thoughts and beliefs. And the only way we could protect ourselves from these ideas is to develop the capability to rationally evaluate ideas based on evidence. To protect yourself from, and to protect humanity at large, to protect our species from the next Nazi extermination, quote unquote, Nazi extermination. Well, I would plug that you listen to this show, and because this is the reason why I created this entire show, is to push forward and spread that thinking is a moral imperative, that being smart, being able to think is important, and we should practice thinking, and we should practice evidence-based thinking. And this is the only way we could dampen the spread or protect our species from irrational ideas and from fallacies and from dangerous ideas that could render us extinct. I do think that the world will be a better place if people could think rationally and set their emotions aside. This is my bias. You can call it my bias. It's hard enough to look for the truth in our era of fake news and propaganda, and with social justice warriors screaming and screaming and screaming, racist, xenophobic, and with the feminist agenda rearing its ugly head. And it becomes harder when we mix emotions into it. So please, if you want to make this world a better place, please support our show. You can like, subscribe, comment, and share this with your friends. And please, starting from this point forward, start using your head. Develop the habit of critical thinking.
You should know a thing about me.